Thank you so much, everybody, for taking out some time on a Sunday. We are very glad to see the numbers going up in the audience and the enthusiasm for this series. Uh, we are also ending this on a note, on a high note, because integration procedures are something which are a very important component of the Omni Studio bundle, and we definitely wanted to do a deep dive, before we end the series, and I will quickly walk you through what we have covered by now. So we did go through the Omni Studio overview, why the product and why did Velocity come within this ecosystem? Why did it gain so much of popularity? What are the things around industry alignment within the CRM ecosystem? So we did cover all that, and then we took a deep dive on the platform level, wherein we covered all the different platforms which are available, the tools which are available within the Omni Studio package, and then what are the use cases or industry specific use cases for Velocity when it comes to telecom or health and insurance. And then finally, yesterday we did a deep dive on the OmniScripts part, wherein we covered OmniScripts, which are the guided process within Velocity, how the UI evolved from Angular to LWC, what kind of capabilities does an OmniScript have, the best practices. We covered all that, and then finally here we are today, where we're going to discuss about integration procedures, and then if time permits, we will also try to give you a brief overview about calculation procedures, and then Praveen will be covering the part around certification, because end of the day, I think this is one of the most anticipated topics within any Velocity or Salesforce sessions where certification comes in, right? So moving on, I already gave you a recap, so I'm going to skip this quickly and give it over to Praveen to introduce himself.
No, thank you, Taranveer. And so again, team. So finally, we are on the last session or last episode of this Velocity Learning series. And thanks for turning up in this huge number, right, and providing the overwhelming responses on the different platforms about these sessions. And hope these sessions are helping you in understanding the concept, right, or overall, like what exactly is Omni Studio, Velocity, or Salesforce Industries, and how it is helping the clients in providing the industry-based solution. So, and again, I would like to thanks all the group leaders as well, right, for all the effort behind the scene in planning and organizing it in such a smooth manner, right? And this is getting imparted into the multiple forum and with multiple other groups as well. So I think with that, I'll quickly introduce myself. So again, I'm Praveen Singh. I'm having overall 11 years of experience in IT and primarily worked on digital transformation for large healthcare engagements by leveraging Siebel, Salesforce, and Velocity Cloud. And from credentials perspective, I'm basically Salesforce and Velocity application and system architect and Velocity Advanced VIP master member as well. Yep, Rahul, over to you.
Thanks, Praveen. So yeah, I'll just take it a bit of seconds to thank everyone here, like all the people who are joining, all the community group leaders, and all the people who are kind of sharing words on the different social media platforms about how they're liking the sessions. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to all of the people who are organizing it and like kind of supporting this whole event. Uh, Quickly introducing myself, I am Rahul. I am working as a technical consultant on Salesforce and a Velocity platform with a global MNC. I'm certified on both the sites on Salesforce and Velocity. Along with that, I'm also leading the Bhubaneswar developer group along with two other co-leaders as well. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Taran.
Thank you so much, Praveen and Rahul. So I think I'll quickly cover my introduction also. I have been in this ecosystem for a couple of years, started my career with Velocity Digital Transformations for large scale telecom providers within the EMEA region. I am currently working for, healthcare and insurance clients. So I've explored, the telecom or the energy and utilities package also within Velocity, and now I'm working on the health and insurance package. So yeah, I mean, my work experience is entirely within Velocity, and I play the role of a techno-functional consultant. So yeah, happy to be here and to share knowledge with you. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next slide. So before we jump on to specifics, I want to give you a quick disclaimer here. Any opinions which are shared within this deck are corroborated from our professional and learning experience, and we are in no way endorsing the use of any specific product. Also, since Salesforce Velocity is now an integrated part of Salesforce Industries or Salesforce, so we will be using the terms Velocity or Salesforce Industries interchangeably. And since it's an integrated part, we will not be covering anything around the commercial aspects of Velocity as a package. Then the content presented here in this deck has direct and indirect references to Salesforce Industries content. So wherever we have tried to mention, wherever we are using that content, we have tried to give a reference in the footer. Apart from that, there is not going to be any sales or marketing or on any support related information shared within this deck. And the speakers here are all part of the Salesforce and Velocity ecosystem. We are all practitioners, just like you all are, and we are just providing this information for learning perspective. Okay, thank you so much for hearing that part out. Moving on to the Omni Studio communication layers now. So today, the part that we are going to cover is right here in the middle that you see. It's called integration procedures, which is basically 1 second, please. Yeah, so we're going to cover integration procedures today, which is a part of the service management layer. We did touch base on data raptors in one of our previous lessons where we explained that data raptors are ETL tools which help you to to load, extract, transform data in Salesforce or in Velocity. And integration procedures are something similar, but they have far more capabilities than a data raptor. So we're going to cover specifics around integration procedures today. Now, commonly integration procedures are known as headless omniscripts. And the reason why they're called that is because they are server driven. You can configure those server processes in a declarative fashion without the use of a UI. So omniscript, something that we discussed about yesterday, gives you an out of the box UI, a view wherein you can configure a screen, a form. Step by step you move through a process and that UI is rendered to the user, right? But in an integration procedure, what you can do is you can handle any backend logic in an IP without exposing any UI. So there is no UI to an IP. All you have is basically backend processes that you can configure by pulling in components and then creating that process in a declarative fashion. Now, a lot of you are already familiar with Apex and are working within the Salesforce ecosystem. So, I mean, there is a common question that, hey, if backend processes are to be used, then why not Apex? What is wrong in Apex? So a lot of times we get this question that, hey, why are IPs being used? Why can't we use Apex? After all, it's all backend processes, right? We can build functions, we can do all that processes, we can configure loops, we can build methods there, we can build variables, etc., list, maps, all of that we can do, right? Then why did why did IPs come into the picture? So one of the key concerns with Apex is I'm not doing a direct comparison here, just for FYI, because IPs are also built on top of Apex. But IPs provide you that additional capability, that additional extensibility, even after being within the Salesforce governor limits. So a very common scenario that developers here must have observed is pending uncommitted work as an error. After you do a DML, you're not able to do a web service call out because the flow has to go now from from a DML to a web service call out, right? So the DML is not yet complete, and that transaction does not allow you to move to the web service call out. Now, this is something that if you want to avoid in Apex, you can do it, but you'll have to create a lot of you'll have to create a lot of code here. It could be batch Apex, it could be a future class that you are probably building something in the asynchronous fashion. But in IPs, you can simply do it with the help of one checkbox. And that's how easy it is to chain those steps and to create different transactions. Now, why are IPs coming in? I mean, IPs are basically a single server call that are done, but in case you want to break those transactions into part and you want to chain those transactions, you can do that within an integration procedure so that you're not hitting these Salesforce governor limits. So one, it is staying within the governor limits, but it is also offering you those that support to get rid of those errors which you will face in Apex. So all in all, it's a winner there. And one more thing that I want to point out here is building Apex is no harm. But at the same time, when you build more Apex code, you need to write more test classes. You need to have more maintenance, right? And readability, flow of execution, all of those things are a little bit complex, if I must say, because you need to follow through in the logs. Hey, where is the code going from here? What gets called when? But in an IP, you get a single screen wherein you can see the complete process step by step happening in front of you. You see the flow of execution, and you see what data went where and what data got transformed into what, right? Now the next point here is absolutely on the same line, which is about debug logs. So something gets stuck in production, or let's say in UAT, you got to log, and a lot of logs get created, and sometimes the performance of the console is slow, right? And you have to kind of download them and then read through those logs. So all in all, it's a very tough and a challenging process. But at the same time, I don't say that Apex is bad, or debug logs are bad. They are essential, but IP offers you that single screen for debugging. So you don't have to go place to place searching for that specific line of code that errored out, right? Now, the third point here is very pertinent because when you build Apex, you need to write a lot of methods. You need to keep in consideration a lot of arguments, return types, parameters, what are the data types for it, what are the variables that you're creating. But an IP just needs JSON data. That's it. Anything that you do within an IP would basically use your JSON data, and that can be transformed very, very easily in an IP. All you got to do is, for people who have attended our session on data raptors, they know that a data raptor transform can basically change the type of data or change the JSON to a required form, a form that you are expecting somewhere, correct? That can be transformed just with the help of a data raptor transform, and you pull it inside an IP, and that's it. The job is done. Whereas the same thing, if you have to do an Apex, you need to go back, write a wrapper code, for that whole map, and then try to do various combinations, send the data, transform it into multiple things, debug it, what kind of data you're getting. So all of that complexity is not bad, but at the same time, IPs offer you that ease of use, to get rid of that complexity. Now, apart from that, I would also want to mention here that since transformations are very long-term projects, and there are process considerations, for example, creating utility classes, creating data factories, handler classes. So all of these classes are they increase the load and they increase the complexity a little bit. You need to create those classes. You need to understand where the code moves from one class to another, from one method to another. And within an IP, you can simply do it. You can open the debug panel, and you can see where and in which step what data went, what data came out, was there an error or not. All of that can be just viewed on a single screen. Now, one more very important property that makes IP a very powerful tool is caching. People who have worked on UI or on JavaScript know that, or even in Salesforce, I mean, that heap size could be a problem, right? Heap size is a governor limit that you got to stay within, and sometimes data gets too much. So IPs provide you that ability to cache the top level data, so that the number of calls that you make are not to the database, are directly to the cache, and you can fetch that data quickly and easily. So IPs offer you that caching capability just with the help of point and click, nothing else required. And then again, just like Apex, IPs also support try catch blocks for error handling, loop blocks. So essentially, it's built upon Apex. I mean, there is nothing that it would entirely support everything which is being done in Apex, but at the same time, give the user more extensibility, more ease of use, and point and click, basically, as we have been iterating from the first session. Low code, no code. And again, you will have that option to invoke an Apex class also. If your logic gets complex, or probably data gets too much to handle, you can always invoke an Apex class from an IP also. Okay, do we have any questions here, or can I move forward? I think questions are being answered by Praveen and Rahul, right?
Yeah, Tarun, I think we're good.
Good, good. So, I mean, yeah, so the crux here is build time reduced, more extendability, and then ease of use is something that IPs provide you. Let me move to the next slide. So something like a signature slide that we've been having for all our previous sessions is this 360 view. And this covers all in all the key features or the key capabilities of the platform tools that we've covered. So herein, I think I've covered most of these things earlier in the slide above, but I do want to cover a few capabilities here. So IPs are out of the box REST invocable. Now, what do I mean by that? I will show that to you in the demo, but just for a high level perspective, you can actually invoke an integration procedure from your workbench, from your Postman. So let's say that you are trying to integrate with the billing system, and that billing system wants to send you a confirmation back to Salesforce whenever they have received the payment for an order. Now, a simple message, they just want to send the contract ID and they want to send a yes or no. That's it for billing payment confirmation. And you want to go ahead and store that corresponding to that contract record. You just want to, kind of change that flag from no to yes, or whatever is received. If it's a no, it's a no. If it's a yes, it's a yes, right? So that's the kind of operation that you want to do. Now, you might not want to give the UI access or the access to integration procedures tab to your billing systems, and they would want to probably invoke it, from their API system. So they can just leverage that one link, which has, service slash Apex REST, and then they can actually invoke that IP from any external system, pass that data to your IP, and subsequently your IP will do all the load operation to Salesforce. And that's all possible out of the box. You don't have to configure a single thing. Now, consider that you need to create this use case in Apex. I mean, you need to create a complete class which becomes like a invocable API, right? I mean, that's the level of complexity and code you will have to do. So build time is significantly reduced, significantly. And then you can always, retry timeout is available. You can configure that the timeout, the milliseconds that are offered as a timeout. The upper limit is actually available within IPs just with the help of configuration. And people who have worked within integrations know that a lot of times integrations are down, they might fail, erroneous data can appear, and then there are times wherein you can probably get data in a different format. So it could be application slash JSON, it could not be that. So all of that you can configure within the IPs just with the help of point and click, nothing else. Now, the second part here is supporting invocation from Apex, OmniScript, FlexCards, Data Raptors. I think this is pretty much clear to all of you. IPs can be invoked from pretty much all the places, Apex, OmniScripts, FlexCards. So there is no foundation that, hey, I can't invoke an IP from here. So anywhere you feel that, let's say there is a backend process that you want to outsource and you want to pull out of your main functionality and kind of have it as a branch, you create an IP and then invoke it right there. That's it. And then it's of course compliant with Salesforce governor limits, but additionally, it provides you that capability of being queued, being chained, being queuable and chained, being invoked asynchronously using future. So all of that is actually available within integration procedures. Now the fourth part here is IPs basically offer you a capability to club multiple data raptors in order to transform and achieve the required data. So not just data raptors, but also other elements. For example, you want to loop through a list, you want to do something there, add a node, delete a record. All of that you can do by just placing them in an integration procedure and then Yeah, tada, that's it. That's how easy it is. And something that I was mentioning earlier, you can preview an IP in design time, unlike OmniScripts, wherein you had to activate them in order to see your custom LWCs. IPs do not need to be activated. You can preview them even in design time. So while you're designing them, you can preview them. And then, of course, runtime previews are always available. And then one more important point here is that IP support conditional run. So let's say that we can talk about the same example wherein are being sent a contract ID and a payment confirmation flag. Let's say that in one case, the contract ID is not sent. And in this case, you don't want to go back and load the data because you know that there might be an error, or you don't want to kind of, corrupt your data, right? So you can simply kind of check if the contract ID is null, is existing or not. And based upon that, you can run your load operation. That's how easy it is. And then last point here is something that I already mentioned. Because it's capable of handling lists, it's capable of doing loop operations, JSON transformations. It's very similar to what you will be doing in Apex, but with point and click. And then caching is something which is, of course, pro performance. Platform cache allows you to kind of render data from the cache and not from the database, so reduces your number of server calls and allows you that capability to process data in a quicker fashion and render it on the UI in a quicker fashion, right? Okay, so this is a very interesting slide here, and I want to talk about it for a couple of minutes. On the left side, you are able to see what kind of data sources can a IP handle. It could be an Apex class, it could be an API, it could be a data raptor extract. And then on the right side, you see all those functions or operations where an IP can actually act as a data source. So, all in all, very, very powerful because one, it is able to handle data from multiple sources, and two, because it is able to do all that processing with the data, it kind of has that capability to manipulate that data, pull it from an API, and then can be used in multiple things. If you see right here, DocuSign, that is something that we were talking about yesterday in our OmniScript session, the signing capability integration. You might want to use data, for DocuSign or for an email, to send an email to somebody. All of this you can simply do with the help of an IP. So any data which exists within this IP can be used for all these functionalities, can be used to pass it to Salesforce, can be used to pass it to an API for an email, for DocuSign, for just, or even as a simple response action. So let's say you just want to see, hey, I want to pass a map of contract ID and then ID, and I want to see how it looks like. You can just configure a test IP and pass that there, and then see how it looks like. No application, but just to preview that data, right? That's how easy it is. Okay. So, data raptors are already, we have talked about it. We can configure ETL operations. Then what is this whole hype about IPs? If we already have data raptors for ETL, why do we need IPs at all? This is the question that I kind of have been trying to answer. But at the same time, it is going to be best when I show that to you in a demo. So consider data raptor to be in an application or in a specific use case. Data raptor could be a subset of your IP. So IPs basically can do certain things that data raptors cannot do. For example, a delete action, combining multiple data raptors is something that you can do in an IP. So consider it something like that can be used to club multiple operations and multiple steps and configure them all in like one flow that does a single server call. And then you can have your formulas here in IPs. You can transform data from multiple sources. You can do API invocations from IPs. You can have an email action that just, by dragging it on your panel, you can send an email to any user that you want. Configure a template there just with the help of point and click, and that allows you to send an email to specific users. Calling multiple data raptors is something which is possible in IPs. If you want to handle certain errors, let's say your data raptor errored out, let's say that you were trying to enter some contact data. And for contact, all of you must know that last name is a mandatory field, right? And for example, the data that you received did not have last name there. So data raptor would error out in that case because it's trying to do a load operation, right? It's trying to do a DML. But you can handle that in an IP. If you see that there is an error from a data raptor, or let's say that you see that last name does not exist in that JSON, you can simply not invoke the data raptor at all in the IP. So all in all, error handling is a very important capability. It makes your solution foolproof, right? That's what IP allows you to do. And then calling Apex classes, external objects, merging lists, all of this can be possible in an IP, but it's not possible really to do in a data raptor. Moving to my next slide, I have covered a lot on a high level of what the capability of an IP is, what can an IP look like, what difference or how does it correlate to Apex, and then in what use cases can we use an integration procedure. But now I do want to step into some specifics around how does a IP designer look. How can you really develop it, because that's what we are here for, right? We need to finally build these applications, these strong flows within an IP. So on the left side that you see, this is a basic UI of how an IP designer looks like. On the left side you have available components from where, just like an OmniScript, but headless, without any UI. You can drag these components from here. You have groups and actions, and you can pick and choose and then kind of drop these here on the structure. And the structure panel is basically a real-time flow. So as you keep dropping it here, it would keep forming your flow one by one. And here, which is the preview tab. So as soon as you have built this and you want to view what kind of response is coming, what kind of data is going in an IP, you simply need to go here and click on preview. And then this is the kind of screen which is rendered here. You have a panel here on the left side which says input parameters. So let's say that I want to pass my account ID here to test out the IP. So you can quickly come here, add a new key value pair, type in account ID, and this node has to match wherever you are kind of using this account ID, okay? And sticking to JSON node name conventions is very important. If you are using account ID with A caps and I caps here, you need to ensure that it is, wherever it is being leveraged, it is being leveraged in the same format. Or you can do a JSON transformation, but that has to be in line with what you are passing and what you are receiving there, okay? And this is the kind of response. So on the response, you will see browser time, you will see server time, and then you will see Apex CPU time. So basically all parameters that you need for configuring a foolproof backend process. And then on your right side, you will see these three collapsible things. One is your debug log, which shows you what was the flow of execution, what was the final response, what was the input and output to various steps. And then you will have this errors and options tabs, which we'll be explaining later. But errors is essentially if any specific step or any specific element errored out, what was that error? And then options are, how do you want to call an IP? Do you want to reset cache? Do you want to call it in future? You want to call it like in queuable or chainable? All of that is available within options. Okay, so I think we have covered pretty much all of this. Extensive invocation options. You can invoke it from JavaScript, from Apex, from Lightning flows also. So very important point. Even though Lightning flows are new, and so is IP within the Omni Studio bundle, but then it does support invocation from a Lightning flow. From any API client, Lightning Web Component, IPs, OmniScripts, all of these can be IP within an IP can also be invoked. So if you want to bypass certain process or operations to another integration procedure, you can do that. create that, and then reuse it just the same way we were reusing an OmniScript. However, the data transformation is a little different in an IP compared to an OmniScript. So OmniScript, what happens is your data completely gets added onto the DOM, onto the tree for the OmniScript, the tree JSON tree. But in an IP, you need to give the exact path for the node that you are referencing. So it might not be in the parent JSON tree, and you might need to give the exact JSON path. We will be covering that in the demo, but just for a high level perspective, I think this is what I wanted to convey here. Now, we will be covering these things when we move to our demo, but I definitely want to touch a base upon certain actions which are very commonly used to build integration procedures. One is, of course, HTTP action. For people who are here working with any industry, they know that transformations cannot be done by by ignoring the integration with external systems, and that's where we need HTTP actions. We need to make get requests, we need to make post requests. All of that can happen using your HTTP action. You can configure a URL, you need to pass on an authentication key or certain headers. You can do that all using an HTTP action, and then of course if there is a timeout required and a retry required, you can do that. The next part here is calculation action, something that Rahul will be covering just after I finish this slide. But from a high level, it invokes something called calculation procedure. So IPs have the capability of invoking calculation procedures, which are the engines or the tools that drive complex calculations, lookups, and then return the right data. So all of us know that from an industry perspective, rating or pricing within telecom, whether it is bundle pricing or subscription pricing, we all need complex calculations to happen in the background, and that's where calculation action can be placed in an IP, invoked, and then that data comes back. After all the calculation, the results come back to the IP. That's something that we can do here. All mathematical operations can be kind of bypassed. And then email action, I already mentioned that if you want to send a couple of emails to certain users, you have a specific template or a customized template. You can just reference that template there, define your email, send certain things there. You can do that by dragging an email action. List merge is a very useful tool because when you work with integration procedures, you'll have multiple arrays, multiple lists getting created, right? And that is the time when you might need to merge by matching a specific matching key, or you would want to merge. So let's say you have one node here, one node here, you want to create like a 2-node array. You can do that using this merge. And then data raptor, extract, load, and transform. I already mentioned that all these three types of data raptors can be placed within an IP in multiple numbers. It's not, there is no constraint here on the numbers, but of course you need to stick to the Salesforce governor limits. So if you are trying to do a DML, you need to make sure that you don't exceed the number of DML calls in a single transaction. If you are doing an SOQL query and you're getting a 101 query kind of error, you need to make sure that your chain on step is checked so that you can avoid that. So all in all, it does give you a lot of capability from a data raptor clubbing perspective and having multiple data raptors in an IP. But at the same time, you need to be cognizant of the Salesforce governor limits. Then one very unique property is hey Rahul, you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, I just unmuted myself by mistake. Sorry.
No problems. So moving on to the next one, which is called delete action. That's again a very powerful and a unique, kind of capability within an IP. It allows a user to delete records, something that data raptors don't allow you to do, but IP does. So you can simply pass the ID of that record, select the object, and then as you pass it, it gets deleted. And that too has to be within the governor limits. Of course, you can't do more than the number of queries which are set by Salesforce. But if you want to kind of delete certain records based upon certain criteria, you can do it. You want to delete from a list, So let's say you have 5 contracts which have rendered expired, and you want to delete them now. I mean, you would have to go and configure a batch that picks up those 5 records every day. But this IP, you can quickly, kind of pull those 5 and then one by one put them in a delete action, and then that's it. Your job is done. So all these use cases, why I'm mentioning them is because since we are all practitioners, we see these use cases every day in our projects, and we see batch classes getting created, things getting created. And then here, this industry cloud offers you all that capability just with the help of point and click. No Apex code, no multiple days or hours of coding required, no number of days of testing required, and then test classes required. Just need to be cognizant that you are sticking to the governor limits and you are adhering to the best practices. Then the second last here is remote action. Again, as I told you, IPs are not disjoint from Apex. IPs are built on top of Apex. They support Apex. They can be invoked from Apex. So it's very important to mention here that if you have a complex logic which you want to bypass to an Apex class and you do not want an IP to handle it, you add a remote action and bypass that whole JSON or that whole data that you want to be processed by an Apex to that Apex class using a remote action. So in Velocity, as you guys would learn ahead, you would know that a lot of complex capabilities within the industry packages are offered by Velocity services. So services are basically Apex code, which have a consistent signature and they can be invoked using remote action. So that's where the criticality of remote action steps in. It's a very, very important feature to have because it allows you to actually invoke those services and perform multiple operations within it which are pertinent to that specific industry. So if I have to talk about, let's say, telecom, people who are from telecom might know that an asset activation is something that you might have to do. Or let's say that you are doing a lead to order, or let's say you are doing a order fulfillment flow, and you want to kind of deactivate an asset, or let's say you want to do a disconnect order. All of that you can do with the help of an IP, but then there are services in Velocity that do that for you. So in an IP, you just need to invoke that service using a remote action. That's it. So pass the context ID of that specific order and then invoke that service. That's as easy as it can be. And for our friends who are from health insurance, uh, you know, very, very complex operations like, let's say, rating of products or getting the rated plans is something that you might have to do very often. And that, of course, cannot be, I don't think it is anyways achievable without a remote action. So that's the kind of flexibility and performance, kind of incentive that IP provides you. And then response action is finally the closure to an IP. It is the last element usually in an IP. It it basically means what kind of data do you want to return to that element that invoked you. So let's say that I wanted to invoke an IP from Apex, and I have a response action in the end. So this response action will determine that after I have done all my processing in an IP, what do I finally want to return? If you are creating an external API for an external system, let's say you are doing it for a contract system, for a billing system, and you want to return a response result equal to OK, success. This is something that you can do with the help of your response action. So if all the processing is done, there are no errors, you can add a response action and then say, here, this is my final JSON that I want to return. Simple as that. I want to return result equal to OK, and you can conditionally invoke it. So let's say if data raptor gave no error, or if the HTTP action did not give any error, I want to just pass success equal to OK or result equal to OK. And you can have multiple response actions being invoked conditionally also. I think I covered a lot of things here. It's a very heavy slide, so we will be moving on to specifics when we do a demo. But from a functionality perspective, it was imperative to explain you all these capabilities so that whatever use cases you are working in, whatever projects you are working in, you can probably back of the mind try to map that hey, I think this can be done using velocity. And then capability and feasibility is something that can kind of vary depending upon the use case, but at least a high level mapping is something that we are expecting you to kind of do in the back of your mind. And from here onwards, I would give it to Rahul. Rahul, you want to
Yeah.
give a voice
Thank you,
over?
Taran.
Sure.
Thank you, Taran, for the whole explaining the whole back end front of the whole integration procedures. We got a nice deep dive inside the integration procedure. Moving on to the pricing, or say velocity calculations. So velocity calculations are basically performing complex and multiple dependent calculations by using point and click. Okay, so like when I say multiple and a dependent calculation, so you can think of that. Say you have multiple steps of a calculation where based on the result of a first step, you want to put some conditions and do again a second step of calculation, and then basis of the second step of calculation, you want to combine the result of first calculation and the second calculation, and then kind of publish an output. Okay, so that level of complexity or that level of multi-step calculation or multi-process calculation can be done in velocity by using velocity procedures and velocity calculation matrices. Okay, so it accepts all the Salesforce data from the Omni scripts as well as from the integration procedures. Apart from that, you can invoke this through a REST API as well. Okay, and when I say it has two parts, as I already mentioned, calculation matrices and calculation procedures. Now procedures are some are the tool which accepts or which kind of builds up those formulas or builds up those conditions under which the whole step-by-step procedure of calculation happens. And to get the exact data or kind of get the master data on the base of certain conditions, we use matrices. Now matrices are something which is a kind of a table structure which holds the output in terms of all the holds the output in combination of all permutation and combinations, where you feed in certain inputs and you get an output. Okay, so key benefits of this whole velocity calculations is you can do in terms of the whole session, right? We have been talking about industry specific functionalities. Now when we talk about rating, it's not different. So in terms of energy and utilities, in terms of telecommunication and health, we have these capabilities with all of the industry. Now talking about energies and utility rate, where we have a users based pricing. So when we talk about users based pricing, say you have electricity meter, right? So you kind of pay for a base price for that particular month, and then whatever units of electricity that you have been using. So that's how a users based pricing model works. Coming on the telecommunication side, where you have subscription or bundle based pricing. So think of any dish TV connections or cable operator connections, where you have kind of channel subscriptions where you pay in the on the mode of channels whatever you are watching, or you have a base subscription model where you pay for a base price, and all the number of channels that a base package offers are kind of available to you. But again, when you talk about bundle based pricing, you kind of select those channels, right? Say you want to have this 10 channels and you want to pay for just that 10 channels. Okay, so that kind of pricing model also is supported by velocity calculation. Coming to health and insurance, right, where you have a plan rating or health rating or a health insurance kind of whole procedure. Now coming to this scenario where we have multiple parameters in place, right? Say if a person is what gender it belongs, what age it belongs, whether he has what kind of habits he possesses, right? So he's a drinker or not, a smoker or not. So those kind of thing, right, also comes in the picture where we kind of go for a health insurance. Okay, so these kind of inputs will be taken into consideration, and the output will be displayed in the same format or in the basis of those inputs. Okay, so this is how a pricing model works with using the velocity calculations. Taran, can we go on to next, where I can explain the calculation matrices? Yeah, so calculation matrices, right? If you see in the a diagram below, we have where a velocity component calls a matrices. Now this velocity component can be an integration procedure and can be an omniscript as well. So we have calculate action. calculate matrices action, where you have like both the places in integration procedures and OmniScript, which kinds of looks up to a calculation matrices. Now, when we talk about calculation matrices, it's nothing but a master data having all the permutation and combinations of input and output accordingly. If you see on the right hand side in the below table, where we have age, smoker as a boolean, and a gender on this third table, and then we have an output data. Okay, on the basis, if you see in the top screenshot, where we have a step where we are taking these inputs, and the basis of that we are giving output. Say now age is 18, he is smoker and he is a male. Okay, then the premium for them is 150. But at the same place, when the age is 18 and he is not a smoker and he is a male, the output premium is 160. So those basis of if you see, right, those basis of master data creation and storing this master data and using them inside our calculations, right? This is how a calculation matrix works. Again, it can be created by the help of a CSV, or you can manually go in and put in the inputs there. You have a capability of inputting the data manually there as well. Okay, so this is how a calculation matrices work, and these are one of the key elements of the whole integration velocity rating engine. Okay, so that's how, if you see on the coming back to the picture on the left corner. Okay, so velocity component calls the matrix, it looks up and passes on the data what it needs. Now in calculation matrices, it looks up to the JSON, which stores all the input data, right, and matches the input accordingly, finds the correct output, gets from the output correctly, and passes on to the component which has called the matrices. So once the data is like inputs are matched, the output accordingly will be getting into attached to response, and now the response is being sent to the component it is calling. So that's how a calculation matrices work. Okay, turn over to next slide. Yeah, coming to calculation procedure. So now we saw how kind of a matrices gets the data, but say now this was a straightforward concept, right, where I explained you have 3 steps of input and you're getting output. But see, now in the same scenario, we have some complex logic calculation, where I in the first step I meant in the first slide I mentioned, right, where say you have multiple steps of calculation, where the input for the first step kind of output for the first step serves as the input for the second step. Okay, so in that scenario, what we do, we look up to a matrix, get the data, and on basis of their data, if we want to kind of put in some conditions, or we kind of put in some logic, or say we want to calculate a premium for like, or a premium or billing subscription for next 12 months. Okay, so those all calculation, those all logics, those all conditions can be put inside the calculation procedures, which in turns calls a calculation matrix and then calculates the whole input output structure. Okay, and gives us the calculations in a output JSON format. Okay, now this calculation procedures can be of a two type, can be a class based and declarative. So class based, all the logic is implemented when you talk about class based integration calculation procedures, all the logic is implemented in Apex class. Okay, and when you talk about declarative, you can apply all the conditions or all the logic inside the calculation procedure itself. So this is how a calculation procedures and calculation matrices work. Now the key aspects of this calculation matrices and calculation procedures, right, they all are version based. Okay, we did see how OmniScripts are kind of a version based. You can have multiple people working on the same version, or you kind of a develop on a certain version, but here versioning is kind of a different. Okay, so you say you want to have a pricing for a particular time period of 2 months. Okay, say you want to have a particular rates of a particular channel, say any channel whichever you like. Okay, so that channel price is say 30 rupees for a period of April and May, but in June you want to bump up the prices, right, and from June you want to charge that particular channel as a 45 rupees, or you want to increase the rate, or you want to decrease the rate. So what you can do, you can create those structures. You don't need to do any deployment, or you don't need to do kind of any extensive coding for it. You can just go and kind of make those changes in the matrix table, whatever rates you want to put in, and those matrix table you can put start dates, end dates, and priority. Okay, so now this start date, end date, and priority decides which particular matrix to look upon, which procedure needs to look upon. Okay, and now this date, right? This date, now you'll be thinking how will a procedure and a matrix know which date to take? So now this dates needs to be kind of passed from an integration procedure or a Omni script which you want to use. Okay, so this dates will be coming as one of the inputs and would be automatically matching, will be picking up kind of which integration procedure versions to be used, or which calculation procedure versions to be used, or which calculation metrics versions to be used. Okay, and priority plays a lot of role in it. So the topmost priority with the date which you have received it from in as an input to calculation procedure or calculation metrics will be taken into consideration while selecting which procedure or which metrics to pick up. So this is how whole pricing model works in the or say calculation model works in Velocity. Thank you, Tarun. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think Rahul has very well explained what calculation procedures and matrices are. In fact, these are one of those tools which are very powerful and are used for handling very complex mathematical operations, lookups. So we will move on to the demo and we'll show you a quick example. Let me start sharing the other screen, please. Let me know once you're able to see it. So first of all, our first demo is going to be around, let me show you that screen first, please. 1 second, please. Because I want to give you a little, overview about the flow and then take you to the demo. Okay, so right here, our first demo is going to be around, getting an API request. So we are going to fire an API request, and it is going to be for, I'm going to show you how an integration really is developed with an external system. So our use case here is that the IT team at Pepso Management is basically commissioning a CRM project, and before they go live, they need to migrate their contacts from an external system to Salesforce. So the way they are trying to do that is they are trying to make an API call to an external database and then trying to.
Tarun, sorry to interrupt. We are seeing your screen where we kind of seeing the all slide mode kind of thing.
Oh, is it?
It's
basically next slide is also coming. You can again reshare that individual slide only, maybe.
Okay, yeah, my bad. Thanks for pointing out. And how about now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Okay. So in this, I think I will start right back where I left. We are trying to integrate with an external system. We're going to fire a request to the external system, and what we'll get in return is a couple of.
Taran,
yeah.
it's again same. You'll have to just hide the presenter view. That's all.
Let me just share that screen. I don't think I need the laser pointer anymore.
Yes, now it's fine.
Okay.
Let it be. Now it's fine. Yes.
Cool. Thank you so much for pointing out. So we're going to fire the API request to the external database, and in turn, we will be getting a couple of contacts. And then our intent is to store all those contacts in our database using a data raptor post. So we are trying to cover a proper industry use case here, where you are internally, firing a request to a database, getting the pertinent data, and then storing it in relevant fields within the relevant objects in Salesforce, right? So it's a very, very common use case, correct? So let me share the other screen now. Okay. This is going to be largely on the back end because, as I mentioned, these are headless Omni scripts. So we want to show you what kind of data manipulations are being done, how is it being configured. So let me hide this, and I will create a new one for you, but I'm going to just keep this for reference. So the first step here, as we did in OmniScripts also, is that your type and subtype in this case, not language, will define a unique key. So let's give a name. For example, the name could be IP fetch contacts. And then the type could be, of course, demo. And this could be database. Okay. And I'm going to click save. So as soon as I do that, my IP is saved. I have a blank IP now, and I can pull in components from here, drag them here, configure them, and create the whole process flow. So what do you think is the first step? I think the first step is basically to create an integration, right? How would you guys do it in Apex? You would probably write @API and then try to, create all that, the URL there, slash, and then add that path there in the method, and then create that whole class, right? You will try to do that. Here, it's a little easy. I will pick up an HTTP action from here, drag it here. Now the name has to be very pertinent, and if you go and kind of hover over the eye icon, you will see the kind of best practices or what is expected in the field. Okay, so let's say that this is external, and as soon as I type the comma or something, you see that there is an error that starts coming up, that you should not be using any letter, kind of special characters, underscores, etc. So try to use letters here, external integration. And then coming to your HTTP path. So what I've done is I have created a mock for all of you, just in the interest of time. This is our mock service, and all of you can create it very simply by just going on mockkey.io. Go to this website. You can design your own mock here for free, and just click on new mock, type whatever data you want here in the HTTP response, and that's it. Generate my HTTP response. That's it. I've created something similar here, and I will show you how this data looks like first. So I have a JSON viewer right here. Okay, it's a very convenient tool in order to if you want to visualize how a JSON really looks like. As a best practice, just come here and click on format, so that if anything is not indented properly, there are spaces, you can avoid that. Click on viewer, and now you will see that I have a list of contacts here. And why do I call it a list? Because I see these two square kind of parentheses, and then under each I see the contact details. I see contact first name, last name, phone, mailing street, all of these, and then the count of four-wheelers and two-wheelers that the contact has. The relevance I will explain you a little later for these two things, but for now just assume that this is the kind of data which is being rendered to us. Now this is the data that you see here. If you do a get request, or if you kind of do a if you kind of enter this URL in your URL tab, you will see this, right? So this is my mock URL. Now what I'll do is an external integration. I'll come to HTTP path. I will simply give this path here. What type of method I'm going to use is going to be get. Now apart from this, you get plethora of options here. What is the timeout that you, so sometimes integrations fail, sometimes integrations are asynchronous. So if you have an asynchronous integration, you can definitely increase your timeout here from here. Make it probably 5,000 milliseconds, 6,000 milliseconds, and then there is an upper limit to it, I think, which is 12,000. But I cannot confirm you, but you can kind of change it from here. How many retries do you want to do? If there is an error, you can configure that from here. What are the kind of headers that you are wanting to add? So if I want to add a header here, let's say content type is application / JSON. So a lot of you might be confused. Hey, what the hell is this? What is content type, right? So when you create a mock, you can define a response content type. A lot of times when you create an integration with, let's say, a Spanish service, or a French service, you would expect some specific characters, some special characters. So these things are something that you define from here. If you are expecting a text HTML, encoded response, basically something which is encoded and is not available for everybody to view, all of these can be set right here when you create the mock. So for my mock, the content type is application/JSON, and nothing. I don't think we need to do anything with the char set here. Coming back to this, so I have configured this. This is done and this is done. So these are the essential things that you need to kind of do. And HTTP path can also use merge fields. So let's say that there is an ID that you want to pass at the end, and you don't want to hard code it here. So what you can do is probably do a merge field syntax here and then type context ID. So then whatever you give as a context ID from preview or from the place where you are invoking this IP will get passed to this URL real time. So you don't have to hard code even a single thing here. But I'm going to keep it as it is for now for the sake of implementation and to make it easy. Then couple of things here. Send response transformations are basically allow you to reparent your JSON. So send is basically going to towards this HTTP path. So if I want to send something to this API, I want to reparent my node, I want to change the parent node name, I want to remove the parent node, I can do it from send. And then the response which I get from this HTTP action, if I want to reparent or I want to do a transformation on that JSON path or node, I can do it from these two fields. Not going into specifics because I want to stay within the time limits and kind of give you some time on a Sunday today, so that you are not kind of spending too much time here. But something very important, and I definitely would recommend that you guys try out different combinations here. And then you have a column wherein you can have any additional output failure response. So let's say an integration failed, you want to add a failure path response to it, that something like, let's say, result went as failed. All of this you can do. I'm not going to add anything for now. I'm expecting my API to return a positive response. And then, as I already mentioned in the slides also, something to close your IP, something like a closure is always needed. So always kind of remember to add a response action. So response from server, response format can be JSON here. If I want to return the full data JSON, any JSON kind of which is getting generated, transformed in this whole IP, I can click on this, and for now I'm going to keep this as true. So I'm going to tick mark return full data JSON so that we have all the JSON that we have in this IP for now. And so basically, simple thing that we have done. This is just the procedure configuration. All setup related things are here. If you want to do a rollback, let's say your data Raptor post returned some error and you don't want to kind of do load operation. If you receive an error, you can tick this, and then there are a lot of other options that are available here. If you have long running IPs, long running transaction, you can kind of configure your CPU limit, DML rows limit. Of course, by staying within the governor limits, you can do that here. If I come here and I see, you will see that total heap size for governor limits is synchronous limit is 6 MB. So you can't go beyond that, but in case you want to reduce it or you want to configure something of your own, you can of course do it here. So a straightforward IP with the HTTP action, doing a call out to this mock API that I have created using get method. That's it. Let's see how the response is. And as I told you, you can always come and preview it from here. As soon as you click on the preview tab, you will see this execute button here. Click on this. There you go. Now, one important step which I have not really kind of covered earlier is for any endpoint that you are trying to configure. So if you're trying to configure this endpoint here in your HTTP path, it's extremely important that you go to remote site settings. You go to remote site settings and you create this mock server or any kind of. So it's very important that you have this here to remain within the protocols of doing any external callouts. So you need to have this configured here in remote site setting, the URL that you will be making a call to, and then slash, I mean, the whole URL can be very different, but the main path should be here. So you should kind of do this before you start your integration. I've already done it. Now let me show you how the preview looks like. On the right side within the debug panel, you will see there are a couple of as soon as you click on this pick list, you will see individual items here. What are these? Debug response full will give you the complete data JSON in the whole IP. Response will just give you what is being returned. So basically only the response action. And then this is where the fun starts. What was your original input? So since we did not give any input here, we have null here. Execution sequence. So in what order did the operations happen? So external integration, which is the name of my HTTP action, happened first, and then finally my response from server. And then individually you will see external integration, and then its debug element, and then response from server, and then debug. So debug for external integration would signify that what was the input to this whole element. So you can see that there was an endpoint that I did input, and then within headers I sent the content type as application/JSON. So debug will always give you what was the input to that specific element, and then the same element without debug in the suffix would give you what was returned. So this was basically returned from the external integration. Now you might want to copy this, go back to JSON viewer, paste it here, format, and view. So it matches what was here, right? It's the same thing, correct? Now a lot of times you might have a requirement that, hey, contacts is not something that we want to return. We want to return multiple contacts in the parent node. All you got to do here is come back to your HTTP action, come here in the response. Now response JSON node. So you want to return contacts, but you want to return them as multiple contacts. Basically reparenting the node, changing the node name, right? I'm going to come here and hit execute again. And now I will go back to my external integration. So the one which is without debug is the output from that integration. And if you look at this, once again, I think I copied the wrong node. So yeah, if you look at here, this, you're trying to get, you are getting basically the multiple contacts from the external integration. So let me change this. And yeah, so I think that's fine for now. You can see that the node has been reparented to multiple contacts. Okay. Now our requirement is not to reparent, so we're going to remove this for now. But instead, our requirement now is partly fulfilled. We have the data, but now we want to map this data and we want to create these contacts in our Salesforce object, right? So first things first, let me quickly do a query and show you how many contacts do we have at the moment. Where created date is equal to today. No data exported. So we don't have any contacts which are created today. Now, in the interest of time, what I've already done is I've created a data raptor post. So I need to kind of drag a data raptor post right here. And this is where I will enter the data raptor post name. Just give me 1 second. Let me fetch that name. So this is the name, dr load contacts to SF. So we already have a data raptor here. Let me show this to you quickly. So we are passing all the whole node path. So if you look at our JSON that we got from here, we had contacts, and then underneath contacts we have contact, postal code, contact, mailing, country, etc., etc. And then two-wheelers and four-wheelers do not have a contact and prefix. So this, if you want to reference this right here, it would look something like this. Are you able to see? Yeah. So let me do a URL here. It would look something like this: contacts, colon, contact, mailing, postal code. Does that make sense? So you are going from your parent to your child node and getting the whole path, and not just contact, postal code. So this is the most essential part here. You need to be very cognizant of kind of having your mappings properly. So I've already mapped it to the right field: first name to first name, last name to last name, etc., etc. Mailing state, mailing street, phone. Four-wheeler and two-wheeler are two custom fields that I've created. So you see that __ C here. So now I'm going to just reference this right here and just have a look at the kind of data that is being expected. So contacts and then colon contact first name is the expected JSON in order to map this and get this value in this field. So I will go back to my IP first. I am getting contacts from here. So I'll be getting contacts from here. I want to keep the contacts as it is. And then on the data raptor, I will change this name first of all, load contacts. And then I will just pass here. Or what I can do is I can avoid this for now. Let's avoid this for now. So we are basically returning external integration colon contacts and then colon whatever is the field. So come right here. You need to give this name first, external integration. And then underneath this, you will already have contacts. So basically we will pass the right node which is being expected in the data raptor interface, right? So we will keep this as is, and then return full data JSON also we will keep it as is. Or what you can do is, instead of returning the full data JSON, you can just return what is the output from this data raptor. So have we been able to pass the data into Salesforce or not, can be returned right here. So let's just pass it right here. That's it. And let's try to preview it now. So I think you can see we have a couple of records here which are getting created. Absurd success is true. So if I have to go back and just see the output for load contacts, I think I'm getting a couple of errors here. Use one of these records. I think there is there a validation on this, Rahul?
No, these are the standard duplicate rules that works from Salesforce. So might be some data is getting saved over the multiple places. So yeah,
Okay. I don't think it's okay.
I'll try to kind of deactivate those. Give me a minute.
Sure.
Let's try to reactivate.
Probably what I can do is I have my personal log open. Let me show it to you there. Just give me 1 second, please.
Yep, that would be great.
Yeah. So just for clarification, I do want to mention that the data that we have is not, we don't have any duplicates here. So we should ideally not be seeing any errors. Probably it could be something in the org which is configured incorrectly. I will show it to you in my personal org right here. So this is my personal org. Let me open that IP quickly and show it to you. So this right here is the IP that we have developed. I'm going to deactivate this just to show it to you in design time, and then we can activate it again. So one more thing that is very essential for all of you is while you are testing your IPs out, a lot of times this kind of error can happen with you also. So it's important that you deactivate. So let's say I just want to test if my HTTP action is working or not. So I will deactivate everything which comes after that in order to test if the flow up till here is working or not. Okay. So this is how you kind of narrow down your development and save time on, debugging errors or not. So if I see this up till here, it's working fine. If I click on this and click on fetch contact from server, I can see that the contacts are being fetched properly. Okay. Now the next part that I'm going to do, I already have the data raptor set up here also. So you can see that I'm just passing the fetch contact from server node because underneath that contact will already be there. And that's what I'm expecting from in the data raptor also. So I will activate this. And right here, I will send the JSON path, which is being sent from here. So anything, all the contacts are basically something that I'm returning here. So I will make this active. And before I move ahead, let me show you if I have any contacts created by now or not. So I don't have any contacts created yet. Okay. And I am going to run this. There is no input required. Please note that because I am fetching all this data from an external database using a get call. I'm going to execute it now. So you can see something happened, but since we are not returning the data from the data raptor, we don't know what happened. A quick check would be doing a query. So you can see we have 7 records which got created. But I'm going to verify in my response from the data raptor post. So I go to the data raptor post, I can see contact 1 upsert success. This is the ID of the record that got created. And then further, if I want to probably send this in an email to specific users, I can also send this ID to those users and show them, hey, these records are already created. If you want to go ahead and start working on them, you can start that, right? So all these records have been created now with their IDs. You can quickly go here and just kind of view them in Salesforce if they are correctly configured. They do not have an account mentioned because that's not in the JSON that I gave. But even if you want to map them to a specific account, you can probably send the account name and then have a lookup defined in your data raptor to look up the account with that name and fetch that ID and map it here, right here. But for the time being, let's say I'm picking up John Hennessy. I will search for certain accounts. I think global media should be fine and just assign it here. Also, one more thing which is important to note here is you can see all these fields are getting mapped here properly. So whatever is in my data is actually being mapped here point by point, right? Now, I think this is one part that I wanted to show you. So we are doing a server call and then we are trying to load these contacts in our database. So these types of integrations we can build very, very easily. And I think complexity increases as integrations become more complex. This is just a very small, kind of data set that we have picked up, but usually data is pretty big and you have to apply a lot of conditional elements here, additional outputs just to kind of handle any errors or any data miscarriages so that there is no data loss, and then you are covering all possible scenarios, right? Moving on to the deck, I think this is the kind of demo or hands-on exercise that I wanted to do with you. So I think this is, hey, we are fine here. Now the next one, which is again very, very important, is something which we did discuss in our session for flex cards, but we want to cover an in-depth thing here. You all saw that within flex cards, we were trying to show you the weather forecast for 5 days, and then what is the weather for today, right? And something like this is very common because APIs give us this flexibility to get data from external data sources and then show them on the UI layer. So in this case, we do not want to store it. but just want to show it on the flex card, right? So that's the kind of key difference. And then here there is a ID which is being passed. So you are passing a specific contact ID. This is not contract, please excuse me for that. It's a contact ID that you're passing. And for that contact, which has a postal code, you want to view what kind of weather is it, right? So something like we kind of did in our demo earlier. So I'm going to show you what is the backend logic like and how do we really get this data from the weather API. Let me go back to this org right here. Okay, so I'm going to pick up this account. This is contact, which is Barbara Levi. Now, in order to get the right weather, you already remember that we created a flex card and we had, kind of published this flex card, created this tab and published it here. Now you can see that Portland or this pin code is basically being used to fetch the weather for this pin code using a weather API. Now, first question is, hey, where is this pin code coming from? It's coming from this mailing address field. On the mailing address, you can see there is a mailing postal code here. So mailing postal code is basically being used as an input and it's being sent to the weather API to ask for the weather at this specific location. Now, how would this look like? Before I get into specifics and before I get into the IP part of it, I want to show you how this data really looks like. Okay, so this is the response that you get if you query for the current weather. So you can see that for postal code 97204, country as United States, units as this, there is a API key that we are using. You can kind of create another account and use that different API key that you get. We are getting all this data right here, which is the current data. So clouds, we are getting all data pertinent to the wind, sunset time, etc., etc. And this is all current data. Now we are not just getting the current data here, we are also getting the 5-day forecast. So how will the weather be like in 5 days for 5 days, or let's say 7 days or 10 days, whatever you want. You can kind of do that with the help of same API, but a little tweak to it. This is how it will look compared to this one. So here you have current, and then you have a question mark, and then you have a postal code. So this is basically your API definition. It can vary, based upon the kind of API that you are using. But in this case, your basic parent path and then current weather is what you were looking for earlier. In our case, now we are looking for forecast, daily forecast for the same postal code and for 5 days. All this can actually change depending upon your use case. If you want to change and make this, let's say 10 days, you want to query for a different postal code, it can change. So essentially we need to build this kind of a URL using our HTTP path, and then whatever data we are fetching, we need to show that in a flex card. We will not be really covering specifics around flex card, but I will be showing you how we are fetching this data. And since we are kind of going top of the hour, I will show you from a pre-built kind of an IP here. Okay, so first things first, we are doing an extract here. So our context here is contact ID. So I'm passing a contact ID. On passing that contact ID, I am kind of querying for a Dataraptor extract to give me all the details. So anything that you see here, for example, email, contact number. Ramesh, you have something for me? Okay, I will continue with it. So what we can do here is, first of all, we are doing a query to this Dataraptor extract, wherein we are fetching certain contact details. So if you go back here, you will see that there are some contact details which are being fetched. For example, the name, email, contact number, birth date, postal code, all of this is coming from this Dataraptor right here. Now comes the main part, which is around your HTTP. So you see we have two HTTP actions here, one for the current weather and the other one for forecast. We have the basic daily, first of all, we're going to do, the current weather. So if I go back to this URL, you will see that up to current is something which is constant. And then these are some things which can change. Let's say postal code can change, this can change. And then key, of course, for you, it can change, but for me, it's going to be constant. So anything which is constant for me, I can hard code it using a set values. So I've defined API key here. My API key is here. Then within REST options, what I've done here is I have kept that URL, which is not going to change basically. And then postal code is something that I am fetching from extract contact details :contact postal code. So something that is being fetched basically from this data raptor extract. So I'm using the complete JSON path right here for postal code. Country is going to be constant for me, so I'm using US. Units is the same, and then key is basically being fetched using merge field syntax from this set values right here. So SV weather :API key. If I go here, I will see this is the element name, and within that I have created a set value API key. And if I have to use it, I need to give the complete reference this : this. So I am doing that right here and trying to create that URL to fetch the data. Similarly, for forecast, the only key difference here is days gets added, because for forecast, you want to get the weather data for a couple of days, for multiple days, right? And then percentage days, this is basically something that I am trying to get real time. So if you go to the preview tab, you will see that whenever I'm invoking this, I will pass the days as 5, 7, whatever I want, right? So it's something that can change real time. It's not a constant for us. And then finally, I am transforming all this data. So the data that I'm getting from get current weather, I am passing it in a node called current. The data that I'm getting from forecast weather, I am passing that in forecast node. And then the data that I'm getting from contact details right here, I am passing that in a node called contact. So this is all about how I am trying to build this. And finally, I am just trying to pass this dr transform weather, this node, because this has transformed my data into 3 categoric buckets: current weather, forecast, and contact. If I want to preview it, I can do it from here. Let's say I want to change this to 8 days. And for the same contact, I want to fetch the data. So I can give the contact ID as this, ID that I'm checking for, and execute it. Now this right here in the middle is basically the data which is being returned from the response action, which is the last action. So you can also check it here, but best practice I would say is to copy it from here, paste it in a JSON viewer format, and then view it. So you can see that we have our 3 nodes. Forecast, because it is going to give us forecast for 8 days. It has a list of data 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 for each day. So you have your dates here: 24/10/2021, 25/10/2021. For each day you have the high low temperature and the condition. And right here the current is, because it's going to be just one node, you are getting that the temperature, the city state, and city state is something that is being kind of mapped from your pin code. So from my pin code, which is the pin code for Portland, I am getting this, and then all of this data right here. So all in all, net what I was expecting, I am getting here. I'm getting all my contact details, postal code, email, anything that is basically stored on contact, the current weather, and the forecast for 8 days. And then this is how it kind of gets mapped to individual things. So 5-day forecast is basically this child card, which is using that array that I just showed you for forecast. This right here is current data, and anything which is here, or here is basically your contact, extract contact details, which is mapped in this contact details node. And yeah, I think this is all about the second demo. And before I jump to the next part and give it over to Praveen, I would just want to cover one last part, which is calculation procedures and matrix. I would not really be going into deep here because we want to stick to some time limits. But at the same time, I do want to touch base on calculation procedure and matrix and how you can use it. For that, let me quickly go to my personal log and show you a quick demo. So you can find it here. Click on these 9 dots, app launcher, and then you can search for calculation matrices and procedures here. I would like to open them in a different tab, so let's do that. Okay, first of all, a calculation procedure is basically the bundle of steps or mathematical operations that you want to do. So let's say that I have this calculation procedure here, and I want to do a couple of steps here. So let's say I have this calculation procedure here for fee calculation. So I showed you, the JSON data for contact, where you are getting the number of two-wheelers and four-wheelers for each contact, right? Now, based upon the number of total vehicles, we want to calculate the total fee that a citizen has to pay. Now, what you usually do is any input JSON which is coming to this calculation procedure will be defined as a variable, and then any output that you want to send out, let's say total fee is something that you want to send out, will be defined as total fee here. So this is what I'm trying to do here. I've created 3 variables. I am trying to input the value for these two and then trying to output the total fee. And any constant that I want to use, I will define it here. So 100 is a constant for fee. I'm going to use it here. So I am adding the number of four-wheelers and two-wheelers here, multiplying it by the fee constant, which is 100, and just getting the total fee out. You can simulate it here. So before you put it or deploy it in an IP, you can simulate it for different values. So let's say four-wheelers are 5 and two-wheelers are 2 for a specific contact. You want to simulate all the steps. And this is how it would come out. So 5 and 2, the total fee is coming out to be 1000. And how is it coming out to be 1000? It's something, if you want to check, you can go here and 5 into 2, which is 10, multiplied by our fee constant, which is 100. So we are getting 1000 in the total fee. And since I've included this in the calculation output, I am getting that result right here. And then further, if I want to add or maybe make this more complex, do it for an array of JSON or a list of JSON, basically, I can do it and kind of place this calculation procedure within my integration procedure. So any mathematical operations gets bypassed to this, and then this is the final result I can get. A lot of times, if you have multiple kind of results here and you want to aggregate them all across, let's say I want to add the total fees for all residents and take out the total fees for a specific neighborhood, I can do that using aggregate results. So it's a very powerful tool, does all your mathematical operations at the back end in a very quick manner. But at the same time, you need to be very careful while using these variable names. They should comply with the JSON node that you are sending to your calculation procedure. So if you are invoking it from your IP, you would want to keep that JSON node with the same nomenclature, with the same name, so that this input gets mapped here correctly and then returns you the right result. And with that, I think our demos are pretty much done. I know I covered a lot, but I will give it over to Praveen from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ranveer and Rahul. I think that was really a great explanation and hands-on demo around integration procedure, right? And I think that's one of the best which I have seen of late. So thanks for that. And I believe for audience, right, hope this demo would give some more context around the capability of the integration procedures, right? So I think with quickly I can cover the basically summarize the key core capabilities and feature of integration procedure, right? I know Taranveer and Rahul has already covered that on a high level, but I would like to summarize that as part of this particular slide. So the first one is declarative designer, right? So as we have been iterating from the first session, as Taran has also mentioned, right, about the declarative and no code or low code approach, right? So here So here as well, right, one can create or configure an integration procedure using drag and drop feature, right, and without writing even a single line of code. So it could be almost anything, right, which you want. Like it could be like it could be either basically any Apex, right, or any coding platform. So you really don't need it here, right? So be it's extracting the data from Salesforce, or fetching the data from third-party system, or posting data to an external site or Salesforce, right? So everything you can do it, right, to transformation and all those stuff without using a single line of code. So I think that's one of the powerful feature. And the next one is support long running and batch processing. So basically IP can support both synchronous and asynchronous transaction, right? And be it's batch processing, or about enabling chaining or queuable jobs, or any step with by using that, right? So it can support all of them. So maybe let's do one thing. Let's try to understand what is chaining here. I think most of you might be knowing the chaining, but let's understand it first. So by default, what happened? Like so, well, by default, all the actions in an integration procedure runs in a single transaction, right? So if the transaction exceeds the Salesforce governor limit, Salesforce will basically break or end the transaction, and integration procedure will fail. So because what happened eventually, Velocity respects the Salesforce governor limits and work on top of that only. So in order to mitigate this problem where Salesforce limits are exceeding, right, or Salesforce governor limits are exceeding, we can enable chaining from OmniScript side, and or from parent integration side, right, which is invoking this particular integration procedure. And that would allow us to get additional Salesforce governor limits or additional time, right? So let's take an example here from the chaining perspective. So I think most you would have seen or basically heard about the relay race, right? So in that, basically goal is to complete the race from starting point to finish line, right, by covering some distance, let's say 1,000 meter. And there will be multiple sprinters, right, or maybe racers or athletes, right, who will run for some distance, let's say 200 meter, and combinedly that would be everyone's effort in completing this goal to reach at the finish line, right? So basically here, let's go ahead with that relay race example. So basically an athlete will start and complete let's say 200 meter distance. Then they will pass the baton. Again, baton is an object which they use to hold, right, and pass to the next athlete. So they'll pass that baton to the next sprinter, because distance is long, right? 1,000 meter I have mentioned. Distance is long and they have only limited energy or stamina, which would allow them to cover that distance with basically. So now, then similarly, rest of the sprinter will also continue doing the same till the last person reaches to the finish point. So now our chaining also works on a similar concept, right? So let's say goal is to perform some mammoth operation or mammoth task here, and which can't be done in a single transaction. So in this case, the way we had multiple sprinters to complete the entire distance, so here by using chaining feature, it would allow you to create various separate transaction, right, to complete the entire operation. So what will happen here? Let's say first transaction will hit, right, and let's say a job got completed only 25%, and during the first transaction it is about to hit the governor limit. So next transaction will get invoked, right, in continuation with the previous one, and that would give the additional governor limit, right? So it will not break anything basically with respect to overall operation. Behind the scene it will keep on running, and it will basically provide this feature. So as you see, right, so behind the scene all the interim results will get saved, and step will be continued in a separate transaction. And since the steps run its own transaction, it does not create any problem or any conflict from the available resources with any other steps, like, and it's also less likely to hit the governor limits as well. And again, next is queuable, right? So queuable is also, I think, queuable is the same concept, right, which we have in the Apex. So generally what happens, so if you want to increase the Salesforce governor limits by allowing a chainable property to run in a async manner, so then you can use the queuable one, right? So obviously with these queuable, you will get the higher CPU time limit, or SOQL basically, or the query, right, or the heap size. So with that, you can always basically prefer the queuable one. Then the next one is multiple actions into a single server call. So I think with this, right, what you can do, you can combine. I think Taran has already covered it in a deep, but maybe let's quickly summarize it again. So with this, maybe what you can do, you can combine multiple operations like calling a web service, or maybe fetching data from Salesforce object, or it could be a DML, like write, update, or deletion of data, right? So integration procedure has capability to club everything into one server call, which would eventually reduce the overall round trips to the server, and in turn would increase the performance or boost the performance. So that's quite important feature over here. And next is that it allows you to invoke your integration procedure from Apex, OmniScript, and Lightning Flow, and API also, right? You can do it from FlexCard also. So what does that mean, right? So that means that you can extend all the core capabilities or features of an integration procedure by invoking it from these sources, right? So because integration procedure doesn't have its own UI for any user interaction, right? So and it works behind the scene to perform multiple operations. So it's quite essential to use any of these sources, right, to leverage the feature of integration procedure. Then it also has a capability to extract or fetch data from multiple sources. Like as we discussed, it can extract the data from any external web services, or from Apex classes, or from Data Raptor, or from any inbuilt microservices, right, which comes as part of Velocity Managed package. So it has that capability as well. And next one is again integration procedure, right? I think Taran has already covered that in a detailed manner, that using integration procedure actions, right, you can do various stuff. Let's say you can perform bulk records update, right, in a list manner. You can delete a record, you can send an email, you can perform complex calculation, you can do asserts action, chatter post, and so many things, right? So again, all by declarative manner, like no Apex code here. And then I think there are certain other exclusive features which we'll cover here. So first one is data transformation on top of bulk or complex data. So generally, that's really right. Basically, we used to work on lot of complex data, right? When we are planning to use the integration procedure, it would require a lot of Apex code if we'll have to do it via Apex. So here you can do it easily, right? It would allow you to translate or map the incoming data into the required format, which exactly a target system is looking for, right? So that can be done easily over here. The transformation can be done easily here. Then it also supports caching of data, right? Which means that you can keep the frequently used data, right? So basically all the data, right? Let's say if you're not planning to make frequent update as part of your overall data JSON, right? Or as part of your operation, then what you can do, you can keep the data into the cache, right? So there's all the top level caching data of an integration procedure. You can keep it inside the cache. So here you will not have to make a numerous call to the basically server to fetch the data. You can simply get it from the cache. And then the last one is error handling, or error logging, or error exception capabilities, right? So generally integration procedure supports try catch, right? Again, it's the same as what we have in the Apex, right? So by using that, you can basically simply basically catch the exception and display it on the source system, right? Either on the flex card or on the OmniScript, or you can pass it over to the Apex as well, right? So all those things can be done over here. Then we can go to the next slide. Yep, thank you. So I think, so as we have more power, right, obviously with this by using integration procedures, so it's quite imperative to understand that how you can take the complete advantage of it, right, by leveraging the certain key design principle and best practices. So basically most of these are with respect to the performance, as we have already discussed. And because again, performance is generally the core for any application or core for any system, right, which you are building, right, or which is dealing with the large customer base, and where you are having huge data residing in the Salesforce system or coming from any external sources. So by following these core best practices, it can be ensured that the performance is always on top, along with the best possible user experience, right? So the first one is usability. So again, as we know that as integration procedure is capable of performing multiple operations in a single server call, right? We discussed that multiple times throughout the session. So it's quite evident that one should always try to use it as much as possible for either making any external calls to fetch or post data, or when you need to perform a CRUD operations, right, within the Salesforce, like create, read, update, or delete. So always go with the integration procedure. It's always advisable, it's preferred to do that, right? Obviously there can be chances where you can go with the Data Raptor or Apex as well, but if you're handling the bulk data, it's always advisable to go with the integration procedure. Caching, we have already discussed that, right? Use a cache to store frequently used data that doesn't has to kind of go through multiple updates. And the caching would save round trips to the database, and that in turn would improve the performance. And here you can basically cache the response of the entire integration. Again, a very important feature, right? You can cache the response of the entire integration procedure, and that is called the top level data. And you can also cache the subset of the entire data, right? Again, obviously the integration procedure will be having huge data. So if you sometime if you only want to cache the subset of the data, or basically only certain node, right, or certain basically section of the JSON, so you can always do that by using cache block. The next is the capability of making an asynchronous calls, right? So basically whenever there is a need to run certain operation behind the scene, right, without any time constraint or any time restriction from the UI perspective, right? Because obviously some of the time when you're hitting, let's say if you're making an external call, you need to do it in a synchronous manner, right? So you need to wait for the external system to get the response back to the source, right? But generally when something needs to be done purely behind the scene, right, and there is no any user interaction over there, then one can also go ahead with the async calling facility of the integration procedure. So by using async, right, so you have fire and forget, you have queuable chainable, which we have just now discussed, and there is something called non-blocking mode also. So all these things can be basically used, and this will give you an additional governor limits from async perspective. So again, so heap size limit, let's say, so generally with async you will get 12 MB as compared to the 6 MB in sync, right? A CPU limit is generally 60,000 milliseconds in async as compared to 10,000 millisecond in synchronous mode. Then from queries perspective also, it's 200 in async and 100 in the sync one. So all these you can get it by using the asynchronous, by using IP in asynchronous manner, right, which will perform the operation behind the scene. The next is error handling, and this is also we have covered, so won't be spending time on this, but yes, always use error handling, right, because that would give you a best user experience. Let's say if you want to display something on the UI, right? So Taran was giving an example. Let's say if we have made an external call, right, where from where, like, let's say service got failed, or we are getting a success or failure message, right? So we'll have to translate that message, right, into a proper user or basically user readable message, and then we can pass it over to the UI, right, for the user. So all those things can be done by using the error handling capability. And there is also something called log entry table, right? So all the exceptions would go into there, right, and you can always query the exceptions over there and see what was the reason for that exception. And then the couple of last one is server side performance, right? Again, so it's as it supports huge JSON or bulk data, right? Sometime you can put the required checks by using your response action, right? So what you can do basically, you can trim or limit the data, right, and you can take it what exactly you are looking for that particular operation or step. And I think these are the key one. Chainable and queuable we have already covered, right? For long running IPs, use continuation. Continuation we have already discussed, right? It works in conjunction with chaining approach. So yep, I think with this we are good with the best practices. Hope this would really help you to understand that what are the key or the core features and what exactly you need to do in terms of designing, right, so that you can get the best possible basically output from the integration procedure. I think with that we can move to the next slide, Taran. Again, these are the normal links and useful information. So we will pass it over to the Kishore, and he'll share it with all of you who have enrolled for this particular session. And yep, same with this as well. Okay, now before moving into this one, any questions from anyone, or basically Taran or Rahul, you would like to add anything else?
No, Praveen, you have fairly covered it very well. So yeah, no addition from my side.
All right, thank you. All right, I think interesting part, right? As we started our journey with this series, right? I think we have covered a lot, right, throughout these all four sessions. Like started with the overall overview, right, about the data raptor. Basically, all the three layers we have covered in a detail, right? The digital, the service, and the developer layer, right? And all those basic Omni Studio building blocks we have covered, by using which you can basically build the solution for your customer, right? So Now let's say once you are into this learning journey, right, and once you feel now you are comfortable with the overall basically modules, overall features, right, overall capabilities, then definitely generally what happens, just just for the sake of getting the entire basically right understanding of the verification, right, of your knowledge, it's quite imperative that people used to go with the certification path as well, right? So generally what happened, the way we have in Salesforce, right, a developer PD1 certification, right, or the admin certification, or any of the specific exclusive certifications around architect, or basically, or on the other side, right? So here also we have certain certification from velocity perspective or from Salesforce industry perspective. So prior to the acquisition, right? So earlier, basically, when it was Velocity and it was not acquired by Salesforce, so the certification model was entirely different, right? It had Velocity developer, it had Velocity platform consultant, and all those stuff. But now, post acquisition, Salesforce have moved three of their core certification into the Salesforce ecosystem, right? So the first one is, and the important one is, a certified Omni Studio developer. So if you're a developer and if you're planning to initiate your journey on the velocity development side, you should go with this Omni Studio developer, right? And this would cover the entire entire arena around what we have covered as part of this learning series, right? All the Omni Studio building blocks, right? How we can build it, what are the key consideration, best practices, capabilities, right? What are the different design principles? So everything will be basically everything would be basically covered as part of this particular one. So if you're planning to go for this, this is the right one, right, for developers. Then let's say if you just simply, if you really don't want to do that basically that hands-on, right, in terms of creating the Omni script or creating the guided flows or integration procedure or any other such thing, right? So there is also something called consultant, right? That is almost equivalent to what we have on the admin side, right? So you can always go for the Omni Studio consultant, where you just need to have that understanding that how Velocity works, right? How it provides the industry solution, or how it offers the industry solution on top of the Salesforce platform, right? And the other various building blocks, right? It would be kind of a touch and grow. You don't the touch and go. It won't be really in a detailed manner. So the people who are really looking to go for a consultant or functional side, right? So they can go for the consultant certification. Then another certification which is currently in the Salesforce ecosystem, that is called Certified Industry CPQ Developer, right? So generally, I think we have already seen a lot of questions coming from people, right? That what's the basic difference between Salesforce CPQ and the industry CPQ, that is Velocity CPQ, right? So we have covered the differences, right? But generally, industry CPQ would support communication, energies and utilities, and media side of the industries, right? And by with this module, it will give you basically that kind of expertise which basically you can leverage when you are working on these industries project, right? Though we have not covered detail around the CPQ side, because the primary intent was to give you a feel of the developer and the consultant angle, right? So we have really not gone into detail around the CPQ side. So, and obviously there are certain other industry specific certifications. So if you are aligned with any specific industry, right, if you're working for any specific industry, let's say if you're working for the communication one or telecommunication one, right? So there will be things like order management, right, which you definitely need to understand. And for that, there is a certification called Velocity Communication Order Management. Similarly, for insurance, there is something called quoting developer. For health, also there is a quoting developer. For energies and utility, also there is a developer examination. And these all certifications are still residing in the Velocity ecosystem, right? And currently Salesforce is in the process of migrating this into the Salesforce one. So again, one of the basic thing, in order to complete any of the industry certification, you need to have the Omni Studio developer certification. Unless you don't have it, you won't be able to basically complete any of the industry certification. And these are the different industries which we have covered, right? On the right hand side, if you can see, communication, energies and utilities, health and insurance. So these will be covered as part of the Velocity industry packages. And again, Velocity Salesforce Industries is also creating a separate package, exclusive package, which would contain the entire Omni Studio developer platform kit, right? And that would contain your OmniScript, FlexCard, integration procedure, and Data Raptor, right? And that would be available the way basically we have these tools or developer tools available like Apex, Process Builder, Workflows, right? So down the line, these would be also available in a similar manner. So uh, definitely there's a reason there is a huge traction or demand of velocity in the market. Whatever we have covered, right, whether it's declarative approach, drag and drop approach, right, from performance perspective, it has an upper hand, right? So looking into all those things is quite imperative for all of you to understand that what exactly is velocity and how it works. So I think with that we can wrap up this one. Taran, do we have anything else after this?
No, Praveen, I think we are good. That's all we wanted to cover.
Okay, perfect. All right, Kishore, over to you.
Okay, so thank you guys. Thanks a lot for this wonderful session. And yeah, this was one of the biggest and lengthiest sessions where we have done and gone through. So with this, I have no words because taking a session back to back on Saturdays and Sundays is crazy stuff, honestly. So thank you, Praveen, Taran, and then Rahul for deep diving us and then taking this session so smoothly and answering all the questions. So thank you. Thanks a lot.